Okay, let's get to our top story, which is what's going on in Ukraine. And the question I'm going to ask to all of you right now, is Vladimir Putin bluffing? That's the big question the Western leaders are are dealing with this afternoon, because NATO and Ukrainian forces are trying to take back the Donbass. They're trying to go after Crimea. Will Putin let them? Everything he said in his speech on Friday, is he bluffing? Or what he's been saying over the past few weeks, was he just saying that for hot air purposes? Or was he legitimately serious about using the full weight and power of the Russian army if Ukraine attacks the Donbass region and attacks Crimea, now that they are part of the Russian Federation? Whether you believe it's a sham referenda or not, doesn't really matter. Russia believes that they have no control, right?
Just based on the past of what's been happening, I would say it's probably the other side that's bluffing. Because Putin has showed that he doesn't bluff. I mean, he warned us for 8 years of what he was going to do, and then he did exactly. I mean, he gave us an eight-year window, and then he did it. Like, I don't think he's a man who bluffs very often.
No, and something that's what Larry Johnson said, former CIA analyst. He says, Putin is not given to hyperbole. Like when he says stuff, he's very careful with his words. He's a lawyer after all, and he's very precise with them. So we'll see. We'll see. It seems like, though, the West really thinks he's bluffing. More on that in a minute. But first, we learned a lot over the weekend about the Western strategy to get us all killed by provoking a nuclear war. A lot of big news items to cover tonight. So let's start with the NATO piece of this. Friday, Vladimir Zelensky went outside with the Bushwhacker twins. You know them from the WWE. And they did a great acting job of signing their NATO applications. I got to say, these were the guys I first thought of when he went and did this signing ceremony. Where are the Bushwhackers? Take a look.
I thought they were from New Zealand. Sorry, I know you're going to the video, but weren't they from New Zealand, or am I missing? Or am I not remembering correctly?
I think you're right. Are they from New Zealand, guys? Yeah, people are like saying 100%. 100%. I don't know. I think.
Yeah.
Were they from New Zealand? I don't know. I'm not sure. But anyway, these are the two.
That's who I would picture him going to, having there at a signing for NATO would be a couple of New Zealand wrestlers. Yes.
Oh, no, they're from Philadelphia. Oh, I don't know where they're from. Eastern Tennessee is where they're from. Okay. I don't know. All I remember is the Bushwhackers coming out. And when I saw Zelensky standing there doing this ridiculous signing ceremony, I thought, that's who these guys were. Watch.
Ми робимо свій визначальний крок, підписуючи заявку України на вступ у пришвидшеному порядку в НАТО.
Hey-o. Then
Is that his real voice?
Yeah, that's his real voice.
I think he's, because like I've heard him talk and he doesn't sound like that. I think he was just pretending like he's going, that's me going, Clayton, we're going to go outside and we're going to fight these guys.
I have a certain set of skills. I want you to know that I will find you. And you've stolen my daughter. I will hunt you down. I will find you. A certain set of that's what I thought. I got actually a couple of emails from viewers who sent me an email. They're like, I thought that this was a total acting job. I'm like, that's what you said. I'm not saying it, but I think I agree with you. Then shortly after this, NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg said that thanks but no thanks. Basically, I appreciate the theatrics and signing this application agreement, but we have no intention of allowing you into NATO. You don't rise.
Even with those two big guys standing there, she said no?
Even with the Bushwhackers, yeah.
Wow.
Stoltenberg said no.
You're on your own there.
You don't rise. Basically, his answer was, you guys don't rise to our high standards of invading other countries. You've been doing this all wrong by attacking your own country for 8 years. That was part of, that's part of your own country, the Donbass. So you shouldn't do that. To be a member of NATO, what you need to do is you need to create false justifications to bomb other countries. You should study what we did in Serbia, for instance, do some studying, then go out and fill out that application again. Of course, he didn't say any of that. I'm saying that. But he did say no soup for you. And we're not ready to let you into NATO. So Stoltenberg was asked about this on Meet the Press yesterday, and he said the best way, this is unbelievable. I laughed out loud when I saw this. The best way for the West to support Ukraine is by not letting them be a part of NATO, but instead just keep funneling weapons to them. Watch this.
The best way to respond is to do exactly what we do now, and not least the United States, demonstrating leadership in providing support to Ukraine. And we will continue to support Ukraine with military equipment, economic, financial support. And I welcome the just recent announcement by President Biden of further U.S. support.
Oh, good. So, again, think about that. We don't think that you rise to the level of NATO, so we're not going to let you in. But we will continue to send as much weapons as possible because, and this is the beauty of it, this is the reasoning behind it, of course, if you understand how NATO works, immediately if Ukraine was a part of NATO, they would immediately invoke Article 5. Of course, Article 5 means that all NATO countries then have to come to your defense immediately, right? It's like calling the Super Friends. You know, you immediately, they all have to show up. They all have to be at the front door. By invoking Article 5.
But we already are.
I know, but this would be, now it would be, it'd be officially signed Article 5 doctrine. Like, we've invoked it, you've got to come now. And this gets them off the hook.
Hey, you let NATO in, but we're not going to let you in. So we're already there. We're in. We're basically, you already have NATO support, but we're not going to let you be part of it because then that changes things. And it's like, I'm not ready to take that step in our relationship.
Right. Right. It's like, let's just be friends. I'll just come over on Friday night.
Come stay at my apartment once in a while, but you're not moving in yet. You're not getting a key.
We'll just do Netflix and chill together.
NATO basically just friend zoned Ukraine. Is that what's happening?
Exactly. And that's the great way to think about it, like a friend zone. Except this friend zone is going to be used until the last Ukrainian, and the friend zone will be totally destroyed when this is all said and done. So the friend zone, there won't be any zone left when NATO is completed with this process. But it's really amazing strategy when you think about it. You don't get Article 5. We then get to keep funneling as many weapons as we want into your country. You're not a part of NATO, but we get to use your country as a proxy war staging ground to launch all kinds of weapons against Russia. Like, that's what we get to do, a perpetual war. That's exactly how we do it. Now let's get to the nuclear. And by the way, I should mention Zelensky in his speech on Friday, as part of that little dog and pony show that we saw with the bushwhackers, he did come out and say that NATO, he said, is already a de facto ally of ours. We're already working with them. And he kind of made the point like, hey, they're already here doing everything anyway. So why don't we just make this official? Why don't you put a ring on it? Like, that's basically what he was saying. And they said, no, thanks. We're not ready to move forward in that relationship.
Kudos to Zelensky and the bushwhackers for being socially distanced in that video as well. I mean, it made his headspace kind of out of whack for us video producer guys, but it was good that they social distanced.
Now to the nuclear piece of this. The West is really pushing for a nuclear war with Russia. Liberal rag, the Huffington Post, has an article out now telling us, this is one of the most unbelievable headlines I've ever read, and I've read a lot of headlines in my time as a journalist. This one may take the cake. They are now telling us how nuclear war would be good for stopping global warming. Just look at your screen. Could a small nuclear war reverse global warming? Nuclear war could reverse global warming, according to the Huffington Post. Like, you can't even make this up. Yeah, we got some
nuclear fallout cold.
I mean, I guess it would be so bad that it would kick up dust in atmosphere. It would wipe out millions of people, which of course is what the World Economic Forum would like us to do. So it would, I guess like asteroids hitting the Earth, dinosaurs, destroyed, an ice age, I guess, because we'd have nuclear fallout. I love the people.
Yeah, because it would block
nuclear
the sun.
winter.
It would block the sun. Nuclear winter would literally like kick up so much dust and debris that it would block the sun for like years. But
I love people in our chat. Do you think this is a good idea? Maybe it's time to re-up your premium subscription to the Huffington Post for more great headlines like that one from the HuffPo. So that's just the Huffington Post. Ukraine today says that it's, quote, very likely that Putin will use a nuclear weapon. That's according to Ukraine. The probability, according to Fortune, of course, here's another take on it. Probability of Russia using tactical nuclear weapons is very high, says Ukraine intel chief, as Putin raises the stakes. So the West is really going in on this. Here's the Washington Post also saying we are 2 or 3 steps away from nuclear war. We are 2 or 3 steps away. Not 1 step. We're 2 or 3 steps. What is the difference between 2 and 3 steps? Again, this is the Western press that people pay money for this crap. People pay money to buy a Washington Post newspaper, and they get headlines like that. 2 or 3 steps away from nuclear war.
I just went online to see what CNN Plus's take was on it, but for some reason they're not there anymore.
No, they're out of business.
I'm always curious, like what their take would be on breaking stories like this.
You want to see what you want to see what Chris Wallace has to say.
Yeah.
Or Don Lemon. Don Lemon.
That's like getting a Fox spin on a CNN bias.
So all of this BS, I call BS on Putin using nuclear weapons. Okay, at least in Ukraine. Now I don't know what these plans are. Obviously, there's talk of nuclear submarines in the Arctic Circle. There's been talk of nuclear submarines. We reported this last week off the coast of Alaska. So we know that that's the case. But to actually attack Ukraine, your neighbor, makes zero sense for just distance purposes. Like, just think logically about it, makes no sense. And even the White House's John Kirby says that the White House sees no signs that Putin is ready to use nukes. So this is coming from the White House. The U.S. sees no sign of Russia's readiness to use nuclear weapons, was stated by John Kirby, Strategic Communications Coordinator at the National Security Council. We saw no signs that Mr. President Putin has made this kind of decision. So, okay, he says it's not befitting a modern nuclear power. We see no signs of that. That's what one side of the White House is saying, but not everyone is on the same page about this. So there's a lot of trying to, create fear around what they're going to do. I maintain that Putin is not going, fingers crossed, of course, right? Knock on wood that this doesn't happen, that he's not going to do a first launch of nuclear weapons tactically inside of Ukraine. It makes no sense. Zero sense. But Jens Stoltenberg, again, Secretary General of NATO, the guy that just turned down Zelensky for the prom, thinks that Putin is ready to push a button. Listen to what he has to say. Here is a quote. He says, "Rhetoric about using nuclear weapons is dangerous and irresponsible, and we have made it clear to Putin that any use of nuclear weapons will have severe consequence for Russia and will change the nature of this conflict." Meanwhile, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin on Sunday said it was possible that Russian President Putin could use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, but he says right now he doesn't think Putin is ready to use nukes in Ukraine, almost like, so he's saying kind of, but not really, kind of, but not really, almost like Putin's hand is hovering above the nuclear button, just waiting. Am I going to press it? Am I not going to press it?
That contradicts his stance from the very beginning because, from the very beginning, Putin has been very calculated and tried to minimize not only civilian casualties, but military casualties. That's why this has been so slow. That's why we're still here. He could have went in, the U.S., like the U.S., and just annihilated everything and then ask questions later and justify it later. But he didn't. He's been very calculated. He's been very slow going and trying to do this with minimal casualties. And so to think of him just saying, well, you know what? Forget that. I feel like he personally, my opinion is he won't do that until he's actually fired upon.
I think that I agree with you on that. And I think if, a lot of people in the chat saying this could be a false flag. So are they going to use some sort of a tactical nuclear weapon that they'll blame? We've already seen them blaming a number of things on Russians throughout this entire war, right? Things that have been demonstrably false, proven false. Doesn't matter. The Associated Press, BBC runs with these stories, and then they issue no retraction when it's proven by actual journalists to be total garbage. Heck, even Ukraine had to fire a member of their inner circle because that person was making up stuff that was even too much of a garbage for Ukraine, so they fired her. So, the propagandist, Ukraine was like, okay, this is a little too far. You've made up this stuff that I can't even say it here on the air because it was so grotesque and awful that it didn't even pass the smell test when we first heard the story. She made it up. She was fired by Ukraine for making the propaganda up. So a lot of people in our chat saying this could be like a false flag.
And they're laying the propaganda work now because they're blaming the Nord Stream pipelines both on Russia. Now they're saying, what is he going to hit next? So they're already laying a foundation to be like, okay, he's attacking his own infrastructure, which makes no sense. But now it's like, okay, what else is he going to do? So they're already setting it up to make it look like we had no choice.
Right. So what is NATO going to do here? Like, are they going to use this as like, some operation? They're going to say that, oh my God, Putin just launched a dirty bomb. He just launched a tactical nuclear weapon. Oh my God, we've got to fire back now. That'll rally the world against Putin. So what's next for this war? Again, John Kirby says we have no evidence that Putin's about to use nukes. So let's go with that assessment and just kind of back off all of this a little bit if we can. Here is a little bit of what Lloyd Austin had to say this weekend about Putin on nuclear weapons. Listen.
That if he feels there is an attack from NATO, I suppose, on Russian territory, which now includes all of the Donbass, he reserves the right to use nuclear weapons in response.
Again, it's an illegal claim. It's an irresponsible statement. These are, this nuclear saber rattling is not the kind of thing that we would expect to hear from leaders of large countries with capability. And so, what we can expect to see, we can expect that the Ukrainians will continue to move forward and attempt to take back all of the territory within their sovereign borders here. And so I don't think that's going to stop, and we will continue to support them in their efforts.
What have you conveyed to the Russians privately just how dangerous these threats are, or what kind of retaliation they might expect from the West were there to be a use, say, of tactical nuclear weapons?
Well, you've heard people in our leadership, among our leadership, that have said that we have communicated to them recently. Personally, I've not talked to Shoigu in recent days, but I have talked to him in the past, and I have addressed this very issue and warned to not go down this path and conduct this type of irresponsible behaviors.
So again, John Kirby, the other side of the White House, saying that we have no evidence that Putin is about to use nuclear weapons. Lloyd Austin is threatening them by, you can't be using these nuclear weapons. Okay, but so you maybe want to call the rest of your office and the other people in the White House and have a discussion with them.
Isn't
on
there
what
only
they know.
one country? I'm trying to think. History, we all kind of need history lessons. History kind of gets to me sometimes, but I believe there was only one country in the history of mankind that's ever used nukes, and I can't think of what country that is right off the top of my head.
Who is that country?
I think it was Luxembourg.
No, it was Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein. Nuclear power Liechtenstein. Yeah, you got to watch out for those Liechtensteinis.
But it's like we're saying all this, and like we have the gall to do this when we're the only ones in the world that have ever dropped nukes. Like they all should be telling us that we shouldn't be threatening Russia.
And by the way, if you study Japan, you understand what was happening. They had already come to the table for peace before we ever dropped the bomb on Japan. Both bombs on Japan. That's been kept out of course. That's been redacted from your history books. They don't want you to know that, right? We had, through incendiary devices, already pretty much destroyed Japan. So that was all of their buildings on fire, torched on fire. There was really no reason at all to do it other than to show the rest of the world, to show Russia, to show China who is the big boy in town, and to set the stage for the new world order.
So,
yeah.
Very specifically, that was I was reading a historian. I can't remember the name because this was like years ago. But this historian was writing, and it was actually because Russia was kind of approaching Korea. That's why we dropped nukes in Japan, was to halt Russia from going into Korea. So just to let them know that, hey, we can do this. And so it was basically we dropped nukes on the Japanese to show Russia that we could do it.
Yeah, and China. Right, to show who's the big daddy. That's what we did. So if you understand your history, you know that we didn't even have to do that in Japan. It's just been a canard. It's been a lie. It's been propagated. Even just like last week, we were talking here on the show And I mentioned, how, like nuclear power, like no one has been killed from nuclear energy, like, nuclear power plants. And a bunch of people in the chat said, yeah, but what about Chernobyl? I said, don't fall for the propaganda. It was absolutely a man-made creation at what happened at Chernobyl. 2 scientists who are pushing the envelope to see what they could get away with. It was not a meltdown that was, promulgated from because of the technology. No, it was man-made. It's exactly what happened. So what's next for this war? The White House has already greenlit Ukrainian attacks. Like the White House, NATO has already said, hey, Ukraine, go ahead and start attacking the Crimean Peninsula, a region of Ukraine that was annexed by Russia in 2014. And Western leaders are wondering if Putin is bluffing. So the West is trying to mount this offensive. This weekend, Russians pulled back from the city of Lyman, and Ukrainian forces took over that town. They took over a rail yard, a critical rail yard juncture in Lyman. And of course, if you watch Twitter this weekend, which God forbid you should do, you'll see that everyone was freaking out saying, see, this is a sign that Russia is losing. And here is, oh my God, you're about to watch the total collapse of Russia because of what happened in Lyman. Okay, that's up to you to decide. Or you can look more deeply and think more deeply about this strategically, what's actually happening here. General David Petraeus, though, doesn't seem to be thinking deeply about this at all. He was on Meet the Press this weekend. And again, I was sitting there just shaking my head. I'm thinking, here's a reason why this guy lasted a short time at the CIA and also failed in Afghanistan. Watch what he had to say about Putin's war right now in Ukraine. Watch.
Let's bring in former CIA director and retired 4-star General David Petraeus. So, General Petraeus, how significant, how big was Putin's move here? I mean, on one hand, he's announcing this annexation, but he's doing it literally as Russian forces were retreating.
It is significant, but it's also desperate. He is losing. And the battlefield reality he faces is, I think, irreversible. In other words, over the last 7 months, President Zelensky and Ukraine have mobilized vastly better than has Russia. In other words, Ukraine has recruited, trained, equipped, organized, and employed forces incomparably better than Russia has.
Okay, just hold it there for a second. So, I don't know if you happen to see all of the trench video that was released this weekend by Ukrainians who are literally being pounded in these trenches that they've built. They're being mobilized and carried out better. These emaciated soldiers who are in these trenches. Okay, David Petraeus, keep going.
And the reality facing Russia now is that Ukraine, a country a third the size of Russia, has a bigger, much more effective army on the ground and other assets as well. All of this, of course, supported by the arsenal of democracy. The United States now up to $17 billion over another billion.
The arsenal of democracy. We will bring democracy to your door with our arsenal, whether you like it or not. I don't care where you hide. If you're hiding and you don't want our democracy, if you live in Syria, if you live in Somalia, if you live in Haiti, we're coming for you next, by the way. We're about to overthrow Haiti. We're coming anywhere. We're going to bring our arsenal of democracy. Keep going.
And virtues.
Announced this week in military arms, ammunition, and materiel, and also supported by the other NATO countries and other Western countries around the world. So he faces a situation that I think, again, is irreversible. There's no amount of shambolic mobilization, which is the only way to describe it, no amount of annexation, no amount of even veiled nuclear threats can actually get him out of this particular situation. He announced the annexation, and he's already lost a really critical element in that, a critical city that would have been a very key supply hub had they been able to go farther. And that's just going to continue.
Okay, so I want to keep playing some more because there's a nuclear comment here I want to hear. But he's saying this critical rail yard of Lyman is like, this is the end of the war for Putin now. Just think about the rationale. He literally just held referendum elections where hundreds of thousands of people voted. And all you need to do is look at the journalists who are actually there interviewing voters, going polling place to polling place and talking to people. And Eva Bartlett, for instance, asked a number of people, she said, how do you feel about Russia being here? Like, do you consider it Russia occupying this area? And they said, why would we consider it being occupied? We want them here. We want to be a part of Russia. We don't consider it to be occupied at all. Again, that's Eva's reporting. You can watch it on your own. Make your own determinations of it. But 4 regions now annexed, and they're getting healthcare and medical services set up by March of this year, pension plans. They're also getting electricity and infrastructure set up. So he lost. I mean, I just can't follow what the hell he's even talking about. How have they lost? By what measure have they lost? I can't follow it. Here's what he says about the nuclear piece. Let's play this part.
It's going to continue to lose on the battlefield. And at some point, there's going to have to be recognition of that. At some point, there's going to have to be some kind of beginning of...
Can I just stop it here? Why the hell is Jonathan Karl not stopping him like Tim Russert style and say, I got to interrupt you. They just annexed 4 territories, 4 regions of the Donbass. 15% of the entire country of Ukraine is now under Russian control. How are they losing exactly? And he doesn't press him at all. This is what you get in Western journalism right now. This is mainstream media.
Negotiations, as President Zelensky has said, will be the ultimate end. And at some point, by the way, as well, I strongly agree with the idea of Ukraine becoming part of NATO. Although, as Senator Rubio noted, let's make sure that the battlefield goes well first.
But by irreversible, you mean that Russia cannot win this war?
There's nothing he can do at this point. Again, the
losses have been staggering.
They have been many multiples in 7 months what Russia lost in nearly a decade in Afghanistan. Many, many multiples. And again, they're losing on the battlefield, and it's going to continue. The only question really is, when do you start to see not just individual soldiers or small units surrender, but when you start to see larger units crumble, crack, and perhaps actually collapse? And I think that will be coming. And then the questions for President Zelensky will be, do we retake that little part of the Donbass that was controlled by the separatists since 2014? And what about Crimea? And when do we have some kind of negotiation with Russia? And of course, by the way, in response to this annexation, Russia got hit by 100,000 more individual, personal, and other sanctions, showing that the West still has more that can be done to Russia. It can still get worse for Putin and for Russia. And even the use of tactical nuclear weapons on the battlefield won't change this at all.
And do you...
I mean, do you hear the craziness? Yeah, using nuclear weapons won't change anything at all. He's lost a little tiny piece of Ukraine. It's 15% of the country. And by the way, the most mineral-rich part of that country, one of the most resource-intensive parts of that country, coal, uranium, the list is endless. So now you've lost a major part of that. And if Putin continues and takes Odessa, then they're cut off from the water, and they are a landlocked country, which will collapse. So, I mean, I just don't get it. You know, I can't unwrap my head around what Petraeus was smoking, honestly. Another former member of the CIA totally agrees with David Petraeus. Larry Johnson, ex-CIA analyst, he's been a guest, a friend of our show. And Larry says...
I mean, they are paid big bucks because they are the experts. You know what I mean? Like,
well, yeah, he's on the payroll at ABC, right? He's a
right.
You know, whatever. He's a contributor.
So you're getting completely unbiased information.
Yeah, and these guys, like when you get Lloyd Austin, you get these guys who are all part of the military-industrial complex. They, you know, Lloyd Austin worked for Raytheon. You get these guys who have these massive military budgets. Of course, they don't want this to end. They want to compete. They're on television lying to you because they want, you know. They want money to continue to flow, and they want these weapons to continue to be built. That's the game.
Well, and more than likely, they also have stock in Raytheon. They probably monetarily make money. The more that these weapons contractors get, the more they make.
Oh, of course. We know what their portfolios look like. Of course they are. They're investors in those companies. So here's what Larry Johnson had to say. He said, quote, Vladimir Putin is not a loquacious guy. He's a pretty direct guy, to the point that, and not known for opaque utterances, Larry says. Putin has made it clear where he and Russia stand. With regard to the war, Putin says, we haven't even started yet. We haven't even started yet. Now, do you believe that? Is Putin bluffing? Or is he, like David Petraeus just said, losing desperately? I don't know. Let me know what you think in the chat. Has he started yet? Let me know in the chat. Is he done? Is he finished? Or has he not started yet? Let me know.
I believe he hasn't started yet because, in my opinion, everybody is calling this an invasion, I don't see it as that. I see it as a liberation. I see that he had no choice but to help liberate these people. So he hasn't even started an invasion yet. So I completely agree with what he's saying.
I mean, let us know in the chat what you think. Yeah, a lot of people saying he hasn't even started yet. Everyone's saying he hasn't started. Nope, he hasn't started. Over, nope, no start, no start, no start. Blaine says, why so serious? Why so serious? Well, we are talking about nuclear war. If this isn't a serious topic, I don't know what is. Discussions about gender and putting up the toilet seat or down the toilet seat. We used to have those gender debates back in the day on television. No, this is a real story. With regard to the war, Putin says we haven't started yet, Larry says. Americans are calloused when it comes to promises and threats from politicians. They generally ignore the threats as hyperbole, he says. It appears that Biden's team of national security clowns believe their own lies about Russia being a spent military force on the verge of collapse, and that Putin's political support is eroding like the crippled piers in Fort Myer, Florida, in the wake of Hurricane Ian. He says the United States, NATO, and Ukraine are in for a rude awakening. He says, I believe that Putin is going to give the West a few days to contemplate his stark warnings, Larry says. He says, here are Putin's likely responses. Deploy the Russian army to Donetsk and complete the destruction of Ukrainian forces there. Turn off the power and the lights in Ukraine, which they did a number of years ago, almost like as a test during the holidays. They shut off the heat, they shut off everything. In a warning, like, hey, stop bombing the people in Donbass. Here's what we can do with cyber war. We'll shut off everything. All of your heat, all of your computers, everything. Attack and destroy all Ukrainian military bases that are still intact. This is what Larry says. Attack and destroy Ukraine's command centers. Attack and destroy transportation grids used to supply American and NATO weapons to the Ukrainian army. They've so far left bridges and railroads intact. Imagine those just being wiped off the map. Take control of Odessa.
Like we just go in and indiscriminately, like the U.S. wouldn't. We don't care about infrastructure. You know, we would go in, destroy everything, and then pay Halliburton to go in and rebuild it.
That's exactly what we do. That's exactly what we do. That's the first thing we do, is take out the electric grid, take out the media stations, the television stations, and take out the bridges and roads and railroads. That's been the American strategy. That's what we do. And this has been a completely different strategy. So he hasn't done any of that yet. Imagine when that happens. And when he takes Odessa. And again, when he takes Odessa, if he does, that's game over. And as Scott Ritter and Larry Johnson and others have said on our show, if he takes Odessa and for General McGregor as well, that it forces Ukraine into a landlocked country and they're done. And then you see Poland annexing part of Western Poland or part of Western Ukraine. It will be a former country of Ukraine. So the U.S. and NATO strident threats against Russia will be exposed as hollow rhetoric, Larry finishes, end quote. So, that's a big update on that part of it. I want to give you an update on the pipeline now, because this afternoon we actually got some good news for people that are going to freeze this winter. Gazprom reports that the string B of Nord Stream 2, the pipeline, may still be usable. So the terror attacks appears to have partly failed. And I thought it was interesting. I thought it's like Nina Byzantina on Twitter said, she said, that's going to really undercut the whole argument that Russia attacked its own pipeline. If they're like down there getting it back up and running and online, like that's going to really undercut the people who said that Russia attacked its own and destroyed them, because now they're actively trying to get it back up and running quickly, Gazprom says. So here's what Gazprom says. Pressure has stabilized in the damaged gas pipelines of the Nord Stream system. The pressure in string A of Nord Stream 2 gas pipelines and both strings of Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline have become stable after the occurrence of the ruptures, and gas leaks have stopped. So they're working to decrease the pressure, and they could have that part back up and running, which is good news for people of Germany who are...
Well, it's only good news if they allow them to turn it on.
That's true. Yeah, good point. So now the people that were protesting in Germany saying, we demand, please turn this on, turn it on, and demanding that their government do it. We'll see if they actually do it now. And the other piece of this, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs told about the open U.S. statement on motives to destroy Nord Stream. So, of course, we saw Zakharova, the foreign ministry spokesman, pointed to Antony Blinken's statements and said that it was clear motive. that the U.S. attacked this pipeline. Here's the motive, pointing right to it. So what did Blinken say this weekend about blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline? Well, he dodged the question, just like his boss did on Friday when Biden was asked about this. So he offered up a good reminder that we should all use this as an opportunity to get off of oil and gas and move towards solar and wind. Here is Anthony Blinken on Nord Stream. Watch.
Ultimately, this is also a tremendous opportunity. It's a tremendous opportunity to once and for all remove the dependence on Russian energy, and thus to take away from Vladimir Putin the weaponization of energy as a means of advancing his imperial designs.
So we should never give up a good opportunity. Use these great opportunities here. And literally admitting right in front of an audience that, look, I'm not going to answer your question because I think there's a lot of upside to this. There's a lot of upside.
I like that he's basically like, I'm not saying we did it, but boy, wouldn't it be cool if we did? Like, look how cool we would be if we did. We didn't do it, but look how cool we would be if we did.
But I might know somebody that might have pulled it off. I'm not going to name names, but I think it's pretty cool. And Biden dodged the question as well.